Now we come to the main event, which is the introduction of the 2017 municipal budget. And we'll start with the presentations from Mr. DeShield and Sandy Webb. And then I just want to correct the order of the next two items, and I will need a I will need somebody to move that we change the order of the agenda, because according to the state laws of how we have to pass this, we first need to do the ordinance, which is 2017-9, and then after we introduce the ordinance, then we can pass the resolution. So before we start, just to get that housekeeping out of the way, is there a motion to change the order of the agenda?
So, second.
It's moved by Mr. Miller, seconded by Ms. Butler. All in favor of changing the agenda?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mark and Sandy.
Good evening. Tonight I'd like to introduce the 2017 budget. This year's budget comes to you after a number of months of preparation. This year's budget also comes to you, I'm proud to say, a month earlier than in past years. The budget process this year began in October with the development of a 5-year financial forecast, where we identified a number of trends moving into the next couple of years, one being some decreases in revenue, particularly a decrease of $1.4 million over the next 2 years in our reserve for debt service. We worked closely with the Council Finance Committee. We met a number of times to discuss. Initially, we had projected a $2 million budget gap. We have reduced that to $1.3 million. Through that process, the Council Subcommittee met and reviewed our major departments and to determine where we could find savings. And some of the areas that we reviewed and looked at were the composting program, parking revenues, maintenance fees for the use of public buildings, looking at some organizational improvements through civilization in the police department and other reorganizations throughout the organization. Although tonight we'll be introducing the budget, this is only the beginning of the process. It is not the end. This is the place where we start and provide the public for the first time the full budget for them to take a look at and make comments. We will have a public hearing on the 27th of March where we'll be looking for a public comment, and between now and then we'll still be looking at other alternatives in terms of making adjustments to the budget. So let's look at this year's budget as $62.4 million. And just wanted to give you kind of an overview of the budget. Budget expenditures this year have only increased, and that's just the expenditure side, less than 1%, or $325,000. And we've been working, again, continue to work to manage expenditures. And if we look a little closer at the expenditures, salary and wage increases are only up, again, less than 1%, or $26,000, and that's based on a number of initiatives that we've done this year, including a reduction in staff. We did a reorganization within the municipal clerk's office. We reduced staff there, and we continue to look at that process. So what's driving, you see these decreases, but however you'll see that there is an increase in the tax rate this year. So what's driving that? And it's mostly, as we talked about before, revenue reductions in the municipal budget. Our reserve for debt service was down $650,000. We saw increases in the normal areas where we see considerable increases. That includes insurance expenditures increasing by $216,000 and pension increases of $169,000. The next slide, we wanted to just take you through the revenues for 2017. And as you can see here, the biggest component of our revenue are taxes, representing 55% of all the revenues for the budget. The next largest component is our surplus. One of the things that you'll see in the surplus this year, as we talk about the surplus, we're looking to manage the surplus. We actually reduced the use of surplus this year from $6.1 million to $6 million. That's part of what we discussed last year when we were doing our projections on surplus, reducing the amount of surplus that we're using in our budget. And then the third largest component that you'll see is the Princeton University fair share payment, representing about 5% of the budget. You'll notice that I did not mention the sewer revenues because there are sewer revenues and sewer expenses. They really cancel each other out. So let's take a closer look at the revenue side of the budget. You'll see that the amount to be raised, which is the amount that we'll raise in taxation, up $1.3 million or 3%. And I'll just highlight some of the major changes in the budget, and we've discussed some of these revenue items before. One being municipal court, which is about midway through. You'll see that's down $72,000 this year. You'll also see, if you go down to the bottom, you'll see where the real changes are, and that's other special items of revenue, which is the second from the bottom. That's down $745,000. That's two components. The one that I talked about before, which is the reserve for debt service, which is down $650,000, and also a reduction in the assessment revenues from the assessment trust. And then I talked about
What's that?
The assessment trust fund is where we do, for example, when we do the sidewalk assessments, when there is a balance in that account, we're able to use that as revenue. We've looked at that, and we're running out of revenue sources there to provide for the budget. And as I said before, we're down, we're using a little $100,000 less in surplus, and that's based on our discussions last year concerning surplus. So let's look at the expenditure side of the budget. As you would expect, salary and wages is the largest component of the budget, representing about 28% of the budget. Then we have other operating expenses, which represent about 24% of the budget, and then the next largest component being our debt service, which is about 18% of our budget. So let's look at a summary of the expenditures. Salary and wages, as we saw a little earlier, we've been able to manage that through both some changes that we made, retirements, that's down, and reorganizations, that's down to only be increasing about $26,000 this year. General operating expenses, which are all the operating excluding the capital improvement fund, library, insurance, and pensions, and debt service, that's actually down. It's down by $254,000. But you'll see, as usual, our pensions are up $169,000. The capital improvement fund is up $200,000, and that's based on, in previous years, we were able to use money that was in our capital fund to provide our 5% down payment. That money is no longer available, so we have to raise the whole 5% for our target $7.5 million in capital in the current fund, so we needed to do that increase. You'll see the library's up 1.5%. Pensions, I believe I talked about that a little earlier. Debt service is actually down. This is one of the areas where we found savings because of a reduction in
New Jersey Environmental Infrastructure Trust.
Mark, can I jump in here and ask you a quick question? The general operating expenses, so did you incorporate the 130 that we talked about in the budget meeting last week? That
Yes.
All that has been incorporated into this. Okay, thanks.
So as you'll see, budget's, again, only up less than 1% in total on the expenditure side. So let's talk about what are the drivers in this year's budget. We kind of talked about some of these before: the capital improvement fund, the PERS retirement, interest on notes, the employee group insurance, up $198,000. And if you look at that, that seems like a lot, but that's actually a pretty good year. It was only up 3%. We usually see a lot bigger increase in that area, and then you'll see the OE, the consultant that we talked about at the work session, is in there at 130. And then on the revenue side, you'll see we see some decreases in revenue, including $650,000 in the debt service reserve, municipal court, and trust. We kind of already talked about these. One of the things that I wanted to just provide council, and I did this at our last work session, is really to try to look at the budget and see what are those discretionary, non-discretionary items within the budget. So I just wanted to break these down for you so you have some idea of how much of the budget is discretionary and non-discretionary. And what I'm just going to go over now is just those things that are non-discretionary. As you can see, our insurances, utilities, pensions, Social Security, our library obligation, the debt service, and reserve for uncollected taxes is roughly $30.2 million. So whenever we're talking about making any decreases in the budget, there's really a small portion of the budget that we're looking at to make those impacts. So what does that mean to the individual taxpayers in this year's budget? If we were to apply the tax rate for this year, the average household, which is $821,000, that would mean an increase in the tax rate of $90, roughly $91, or a 2.3% increase in the tax rate this year. And again, one thing that I want to keep saying is this is the beginning of the process. I know there's some other areas we want to continue to look at to see if there can be improvements made to the budget. There's been a lot of work put into the budget so far, so I'll just open it up to any questions from council at this point.
Do you have any comments too before we open up?
Thank you.
All right. I had just a follow-up to Mr. Siller's question at the end of our last meeting, which was last week, about how the projections for the surplus were, the surplus came in higher, significantly higher than we were expecting.
Mm-hmm.
And did that, when you went back and looked, is that still the case? And do we want to use some of that, for example, for the capital improvement fund or something that would help out this year?
We just completed the AFS, and so we're doing an analysis of the why there's an increase in the surplus for this year. Once I think we do that analysis, we'll better be able to guide council on what's the most appropriate thing to do with the increased surplus this year. So that is a possibility. And again, we want to do the analysis to see why did it increase so much. And it may be some rational reasons for it, but we wanted to do that before we make any recommendations.
And when is that going to happen? I mean, will we?
We're in the process of doing that now, and I know the Citizens Finance Committee wants to review it on Monday, so looks like we're going to have it done by Monday, right?
It's done.
Okay, so then that would come back to council then for an amendment on sometime in March then? Is that?
Yes.
Okay,
You would have to, the amendment will have to be done after the public hearing.
okay. Are there other questions from council? Mr. Carmiller?
I think I know the answer to this, but have we looked at the insurance costs? I know the Borough Finance Committee looked at going to a different insurance, and it turned out that the state insurance program was definitely better, but have we double-checked that?
We actually have, and we reviewed that with the Personnel Committee. One of the things I also want to do this year is to look at, in terms of our insurance brokers, to go out and see if we can get someone. I like an aggressive insurance broker. I'm not sure if our broker currently is as aggressive as I'd like him to be. So I want to look at those possibilities so that we can go out again in the future and look at it.
Well, don't we use the state insurance program?
Yes.
Okay.
We do. Your response was that we did look at this, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, we did during the year.
Okay.
And you have to have, was there a certain percentage of change that you had to have to make it worthwhile? We just weren't close to getting, I thought there was a percentage that you
There
needed,
was, and I don't
certain
recall what it is,
savings,
right.
and we just weren't close to making the switch. I had a question. You have the library obligation down as a non-discretionary spending.
And you know what, there's a portion of it that is required, an actual state required portion of the library, which is a mandated portion. We pay above that also.
Right.
So, and I'm not sure which figure I have to check and just make sure I gave you the right figure for the library, not the total amount, but only the annual amount. So I'll figure that out to make sure.
But just for clarification of that, when you said the state mandated portion, did you mean there's a state mandated minimum.
Correct.
It's not a percentage or anything like that.
it's
It's like
actually
it's a
It's
set
based on the,
amount.
it's based on the assessed valuation. They call it a 1/3 of a mil. So I think it's around 2.9 that we are required to give the library. And I mean, you can see the numbers. We give them certainly more than that, so.
Okay, I think maybe in the next, we should have that broken out every time, because I think it's I think it's important for us to all be aware of that. I think it reflects our priorities, and I think it's really good, but I still think it's a good thing for us to know and see.
Are there other questions? I mean, this is a conversation that will be continued, so I'll also entertain a motion to introduce.
I think Bernie has it.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see you. Yeah,
I
Mr.
think the
Miller.
last time we discussed this,
Before- But just in terms of process, we need to do the ordinance first before you do
I
anything.
know, we changed this. We're all set with that.
quick question for you, Mark, and that is, the last time we discussed this, and you pointed out the reduction in the revenue from the court, we asked that there be an explanation of why the revenue from the court is down.
I'll get you guys a report on that.
But just as a side note on that, we do want to be cautious, because we heard when we've been talking about police practices, how important it is to not to use fines as revenue, as a revenue source. Of course, they are a revenue source, but we don't want to try to go get more.
I think that's right. I
get more
think
small.
that to square the circle of both, I don't think that's what Bernie's suggesting. I think what Bernie's suggesting is, did something happen
Why?
that,
What
like,
happened?
that, we fell down on something that we need to fix, and then we want to be sensitive, Jenna, you're right. We definitely don't want, we're not saying to the courts, you need to produce a certain amount of revenue, because that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, but no, I agree with the question. I just wanted to be clear.
My question was not directed at the chief in the sense of suggesting that we step up enforcement in some way or another, but I'd like to understand why the court revenue is down.
Understood.
And I would say, actually, before we introduce the ordinance, I'd like to open it up. If there's any members of the public here who'd like to speak. No? You said your piece already?
Mayor,
Okay.
I have a question for council. Do I need to recuse or abstain from this vote, given my employment status?
Well, you're in the same situation as Mr. Miller because of your wife's service on the library board of trustees, so it's the same conflict. Now, you can't vote on anything, I think you can vote generally on the budget, you can't vote on anything specific to the library. I don't know how because this has been an issue that you've confronted annually, and I just can't recall last year or the prior year how we handled that.
Almost, Bernie, did you ask that it be voted on separately? I'm just trying to recall.
I can't
We did
recall the
I can't
mechanics of
remember.
it, but it would be, for Councilman Quinn, it would be exactly the same process as for Councilman Miller, so
My
however
recollection.
we've done it for the one, we'll do it for the both.
My recollection, as long as you're voting on the budget as a whole document, it's not an issue. It's an issue when we pull out the Pacific
Yeah.
Library.
I think that's
I
the
believe what
case, and I think
happened
that's what
last
you've
year,
done.
So
Right.
I'm remembering is that there were some proposals at the last minute about how to bring how to bring down the tax rate a bit, and so we split that up.
We
That
considered
sounds
a
right.
cut to the library,
Right.
some decrease in our funding for the library.
Right.
You're absolutely right.
Okay, so I will then go back and for ordinance 2017-9, an ordinance to exceed the municipal budget appropriation limits and to establish a cap bank, NJSA 40A 4-45.14. Is there a motion to introduce?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Miller, and is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Liverman, and just as a point of explanation, and Sandy can jump in if I say something wrong, this is something we do every year as a housekeeping measure. We are not by any means proposing to go over our cap, is that correct?
That's correct. The state limit for 2017 was 0.5%. This allows us to bank the additional 3% to get us up to 3.5%. It's available for us to use for this year and the next 2 succeeding years. So it is a housekeeping thing. It's something we do every year.
All right, and Madam Clerk, can you please read the roll?
Ms. Howard?
Yes.
Ms. Cramiller?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Liverman?
Yes.
Ms. Butler?
Yes.
Mr. Quinn?
Yes.
All right, and the public hearing for this ordinance will be on March 27th, 2017. And next we come to 17-75, which is the introduction of the 2017 municipal budget. And is there a motion to approve? Moved by Mr.
Second.
Miller and seconded by Ms. Crummiller. And Madam Clerk, please call the roll. Oh, sorry, yep, let's have some
Before we
discussion.
call the roll, when are we going to have a discussion about sort of the cost savings that we're looking, we talked about them in our morning budget meeting, but I wonder if we are going to outline them for the evening public, the sorts of things that are on our agenda to consider for cost-cutting measures for next year, or
Mr. DeShield, I think, ran through some of them during this presentation, but if you want to reiterate those.
Some of the areas that we're looking at is reviewing the compost program, seeing if there's continue that program or increase the cost, the price of that program. The others include the parking revenues. We'll be looking at increases in parking revenues, looking at a maintenance fee for the use of public buildings. We're looking at a number of reorganizations, including civilianizing the police department, and also some of the other departments that we'll be looking at. I feel like I missed some, but I think those were the major ones.
What about library park? Were we going to look at the library parking policy?
yes.
Yes, I think that's one that was also brought up.
Well, I was also wondering if we could review or get a status on the firehouses, because those are, you know, these big assets that we're holding on to that aren't doing anything for anyone right now. And I don't know how much we spend on maintaining them, or if we should talk about.
That's also something that I know the Finance Committee had asked for, and we're putting that together for council. It's also one of the goals is to look at the municipal properties as one of the goals that you set for this year. So we'll do that we'll make sure we get you that information.
Is there any possibility of renting either of those for, I can't.
Off the top, I couldn't answer you off the top of my head, but we can look at it and see.
My other question is about our the other budget we do, so our capital budget, and what's the plan for that and when we would see that?
We will be looking, one of the things that we need to talk about in terms of the council is to bring back in March to have a separate kind of work session to go through the capital budget and recommendations on the capital budget. And that will be introduced to you guys at the meeting on the 27th. So at the next meeting, more than likely, we'll need to look at the capital budget.
Okay, and then I know CFAC worked pretty hard on these two policies that council passed. So there was a debt policy and also surplus policy. And I just to make sure that CFAC was reviewing the budget in terms of that surplus policy.
We're actually meeting next week, and as I discussed before, part of that meeting is to review the surplus policy that we talked about before. In terms of the debt service policy, we did initial review with CPAC in terms of the capital, and again, the whole concept is we have to stay within the $7.5 million budget cap, and that's what we've committed to kind of bring to council's $7.5 million in capital spending.
Wait, I didn't really understand what you just said. Are we sticking to the debt policy?
Yeah. Yes. Okay. That's the $7.5 million that I will be bringing to you.
Okay. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Ms. Howard?
Yes.
Ms. Cramiller?
Yes.
Mr. Miller? Mr. Liverman? Ms. Butler?
Yes.
Mr. Quinn?
Yes.
All right. So the 2017 budget's introduced, and we'll be discussing it more through the month of March. Thank you very much. And thank you for getting it to us early. Okay,